Nikki Haley recently gave a speech at the UN regarding the non-binding agreement voted on by 128 nations that condemns the U.S.'s actions moving the Israeli capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, Haley got up and spoke about how the U.S. should be respected some more. So let's take a look.
But we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. When a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. Unlike in some UN member countries, the United States government is answerable to its people. As such, we have an obligation to acknowledge when our political and financial capital is being poorly spent. We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways. Those are the thoughts that come to mind when we consider the resolution before us today. The arguments about the President's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem have already been made. They are by now well known. The decision was in accordance to U.S. law dating back to 1995, and its position has been repeatedly endorsed by the American people ever since. The decision does not prejudge any final status issues, including Jerusalem's boundaries. The decision does not preclude a two-state solution if the parties agree to that. The decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, the President's decision reflects the will of the American people.
What the fuck did I just watch? So what you just saw is honestly pretty much the U.S.'s whole foreign policy agenda wrapped up into one little statement. But especially when she said, we make generous contributions to the UN, but we also recognize we also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. Basically what she's saying is, we pay a lot of money for you guys to be condemning our actions right now. So maybe we pull out of the UN. Maybe our money is spent somewhere else more effectively, more efficiently to get us what we want. Because obviously, paying our dues and bribes here isn't working. And let's look at the nations that voted with the U.S. and Israel for this measure. So those would include the Marshall Islands, Togo, Micronesia, Honduras, Guatemala, Nauru, and Palau. We all know how much international pull Micronesia and Togo have. I've honestly never heard of Nauru or Palau. But, apparently they have strong opinions about the U.S. moving their embassy into Jerusalem and declaring Jerusalem as the legitimate capital of Israel. So it's so funny seeing how split people are in America over this issue and why it was done in the first place. Because you have to understand that Israel and Palestine goes back decades, but not forever. And there's basically been the same problem persisting there during this entire time, which is in 1967, after the Arab-Israeli War, borders were drawn. Some land was given to the Palestinians, some land was given to Israel. Now, since then, Israel has slowly but surely moved into these areas and occupied territory under international law that was given to the Palestinians. So the result ends up being that Palestine is severely repressed. Palestinians are basically living in an apartheid state, and Israel's committing atrocities and getting away with it because they pay a lot of bribes and shit to the UN. Now, interestingly enough, 83% of the UN's resolutions that go towards condemning a nation's actions all went towards Israel. 83%. I believe that's a little heavy-handed given all of the atrocities going around the world. But it goes to show, like, these people have been persecuted and stepped and spit on for decades. And when we try to, tackle it with international policy, it fails. When we try any kind of diplomacy between the two groups, we always either find a way to screw it up, or there's not an agreement that's agreeable to both sides. But essentially, you have Trump pandering to his base, to the evangelical Christians who believe that when the Jews go back to their homeland in Israel or in Jerusalem, that it'll bring back the second coming of Christ, the apocalypse, end times, whatever you want to call it. So, I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. We've really narrowed in on what causes so many conflicts when it comes to foreign policy issues, and it's invisible sky fairies. The Israelis think my invisible sky fairy Yahweh said that this is your holy land and this is where you belong, and the Islamists and Arabs, they think, no, my sky fairy said that this is where I belong. And Jerusalem is in the area where Muhammad talked to God on the mountain and performed miracles. Or no, I don't think he performed miracles. I'm not too sure about that. But it has religious significance for both groups. And the Jews' argument is basically, we've been persecuted for so long. We deserve our own country. And that whole idea turned into what is now called Zionism. And that's just the belief that the Jewish people deserve their own state. But often enough, Zionists control a lot of foreign policy related issues. And that's why you'll see people like Netanyahu and Trump or former U.S. presidents always agreeing with each other over the UN. So if there's a resolution against Israel, it's a guarantee that the U.S. is not voting against our ally in Israel. And why we're allies with Israel really just has to do with religious ties to the ethnic community there of Jews and their control of the region and their importance in geopolitics. It has absolutely nothing to do with the moral or right thing to do. We're not in Israel because we think that they deserve the land more than the Palestinians. It's all over a religious idea that they have a claim to the land. Just think about how silly that is. People killing and dying over a fucking millennia old fairy tale. And now, as a result, in the modern day, we have so much division and lies and propaganda spread to favor one over the other. It makes no sense. So Nikki Haley, shame on you. That was absolutely disgusting. I don't ever want to hear. I mean, I guess if you're going to come across that honest and candid, sure. If that's really how you feel, I'd prefer that we actually take different steps towards foreign policy, where that's not our first way of answering a vote we don't like. That's not our first retaliatory response. It's just, maybe we just fucking cut you off and leave you, because we're not paying money to be told what to do.